My dad tried to test my husband. My husband tested him back. The hammer slipped. It glanced off the edge of the ladder and spun toward the concrete, end over end, like a bad decision unfolding in slow motion. My dad reached out to grab it. Reflex, pride, stubbornness, and would have shredded his fingers if a gloved hand hadn't shot out first and caught it mid-air. "Please step back behind the tape," my husband said, calm but firm. That's why it's there. The site went quiet. Sawdust hung in the hot afternoon light. My dad stared at the yellow tape he'd just stepped over like it had appeared out of nowhere. It hadn't. He just didn't think rules were for him. He had been testing my husband for months. That afternoon, on the build site, my husband decided to test him back, and everything after that, every argument, apology, and new boundary, began with the sound of that hammer not hitting the ground. My name is Lila. I'm 29, a middle school art teacher who makes more clay mugs than any one person needs. I grew up in a small town by the river where the streetlights blink on too early and everything smells like rain after a storm. My dad, Hassan, is a retired mechanic who believes in hard work, firm handshakes, and the idea that the people you love should be able to prove themselves on command. My mom, Samina, is warm in the way a blanket is warm, quiet, steady there before you think to reach for her. She knows the weather by the frogs that sing at night and kept our family from fracturing more times than I know. We live 20 minutes from my parents now. My husband, Ethan, is a project manager for a nonprofit that builds accessible housing. He has the hands of someone who respects plans and the patience of someone who knows a plan will still go wrong sometimes. He laughs easily. He cooks like he's practicing a small kindness. He wears safety glasses to crack coconuts because it seemed like a good idea. I thought my dad liked him. At first, then the test began. They started small. Dad forgot to mention that the old couch he'd offered needed to be hauled down a narrow staircase. He stood at the bottom with his arms crossed, watching Ethan angle the frame. "See if he can do it without scratching the wall," he said to me. This was an exam. Later it was the sink. Dad turned off the water and deliberately misthreaded the faucet so it would leak. When Ethan fixed it in 10 minutes and wiped up the water, my dad raised an eyebrow. Guess that one was easy. It would have been silly if it hadn't been pointed. There was a heat under everything, a dare. I asked my mom once softly, "What is he doing?" She stirred her tea, staring at the steam. "He loves you," she said. "He doesn't know how to trust what he cannot measure." I tried to let it go. But the tests kept growing. The night of the thunderstorm, Dad called at 10:45 p.m. The sky outside our apartment window was a flickering bruise. "Car won't start," he said, casual, testing the weight of each word. "Let's see if your husband can handle jumper cables in the rain." I looked at Ethan, already slipping into his boots. "We can go in the morning," I whispered, hand on the phone. "Now's fine," he mouthed. He kissed my forehead, grabbed an umbrella, and we went. Dad waited in the driveway with a flashlight tilted just wrong so it shone in Ethan's eyes. The battery was a brand new one. The problem, if you could call it that, was the loosened ground cable. Ethan found it, tightened it, started the engine, and closed the hood. "All good," he said. My dad cocked his head. That took longer than I expected. The result didn't matter. Only the spectacle. At dinner the next week, Dad said, "If a man really cares for family, he takes the toughest piece of meat." He slid the charred end of the roast onto Ethan's plate, watching him like a referee. Ethan chewed, smiled, and asked for the recipe. I laughed, trying to make it lighter. The laugh stuck in my throat. I started hearing a second voice inside me I didn't like. It sounded like my dad. It asked, "Will Ethan pass?" And then miserably, "What if he doesn't?" Ethan seemed unfazed. He never complained. He listened to my rants afterward with the patience of someone untangling a knot. "I don't need to pass his tests," he said. "I need to love you and respect your parents. The rest is noise," I believed him. And yet the situation kept escalating, like someone slowly turning up a radio. 2 months later, Dad invited us to a barbecue. The sun was still high, birds making the trees look like they were breathing. My dad stood at the grill, flame too strong, smoke curling. He'd left the tongs inside. He looked at Ethan. "Grab the patties with your hands," he said, almost playful. "Let's see," Ethan laughed. "I'll get the tongs," he said, and jogged to the kitchen. For a second, my dad looked disappointed, like the point wasn't dinner but a dare accepted or declined. That night, as we drove home in the wash of streetlights, I asked, "How are you so calm?" Ethan drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "Your dad reminds me of the foreman on my first job," he said. He used to check my measurements, then recheck them with a different tape, then tell me both tapes were wrong. One day I realized his goal wasn't accuracy. It was control. He glanced over at me. Control is just fear wearing boots. The next test arrived on Bismillah Day. That's what my mom calls the beginning of any new thing. We'd signed the lease on our new place. My dad came to help, which is code for overseeing and offering commentary like it's oxygen. He brought a measuring tape and a silent, simmering energy that made me want to shrink. He watched Ethan assemble a bookshelf without looking at the instructions. Bold, Dad said. Real men don't need manuals? Ethan smiled. Real men read safety guidelines, he said, tapping the bag with the wall anchors. He secured the shelf to the studs. 2 hours later, there was a tremor. Maybe a heavy truck going by, maybe my nerves, but the shelf didn't move. My dad ran his finger along the top, hunting for dust or fault, and found neither. He said again. It would have been enough, maybe, to let time cool the heat. But it wasn't enough for my dad. He needed a decisive proof, a moment he could point to and say, I found the weak point. Or I couldn't. It came on a Saturday, under a sky that looked like new denim. Dad asked us to meet him at the Habitat build site outside town. He said he wanted to see where Ethan did volunteer work. Ethan's nonprofit was in the middle of framing a duplex with ramps and wide doorways. By then, I'd seen Ethan in work mode. It's a different version of him. More clipped, more precise, the kindness still there, but tucked under focus. We parked. The air was clean and full of sound, nail guns, someone calling for a level, a radio crooning a song that smelled like summer. Volunteers in bright vests moved like an organized swarm. My dad eyed the tape lines and safety cones. Never seen a house so scared of tape, he muttered. Ethan greeted the site lead, a woman named Sonia whose braids were tucked into a cap. You're running the west side? She asked. Yep, he said. Ramp and porch. Crew 3 with me. Sonia nodded, turned to the group, and clapped for attention. Welcome to build day 6, she shouted. Safety first, eyes on me. She rattled off the brief. Glasses, gloves, tape lines, clear walkways, hydration. My dad rolled his shoulders as if warming up for a different kind of sport. We split. Ethan took his crew to the west ramp. My dad drifted after him, ignoring the sign that said volunteer check-in. I'll just watch, he said to no one. Ethan handed out assignments. Rhea, you're on measuring and marking. Gus, pre-drill. Keisha, you and I will set the posts. Lila, if you're up for it, can you be our runner for water and screws? I grinned. Yes, sir. I liked this version of him. He was easy and in charge, kindness wrapped in authority. It reminded me of orchestra conductors, how they made dozens of moving parts feel like a single breath. My dad stepped over the yellow tape that marked the tools zone. Do you want me to cut? He asked, fingers already reaching for the saw. Ethan didn't look up. Not without sign-in and gear, he said, voice even. He pointed to the check-in table. Safety glasses and a brief. Please. Dad smiled like someone humoring a child. I've been using saws since before you were born. And I'm responsible for everyone's hands, Ethan said, finally meeting his eyes. Please, my dad's jaw twitched. He walked to the table. He took the glasses with a joke and the vest with a sigh. He signed his name like the pen had insulted him. Work hummed. The ramp was a living thing coming into shape, squared, leveled, braced. Sweat ran down my back. Rain threatened in the distance and then changed its mind. My dad watched. He accidentally stood where people needed to move. He cracked stay-awake jokes and attempted to advise. At one point, he picked up a post level and said, "This thing is unnecessary. I can eyeball it, then tell you if the bubble agrees." "Please put that down," Ethan said, not unkindly. "It's calibrated for a reason." Dad set it down, with a thud that knocked a box of screws to the ground. They spilled like sharp confetti. I crouched to collect them. My face burned with a mix of embarrassment and fury I didn't know where to aim. At lunch, sitting on the curb with foil-wrapped sandwiches, my dad leaned over to me. "He's too by the book," he said. "Real life isn't a manual." "Real life has a lot of thumbs," I said, sharper than I meant. "I like mine attached." He wiped his mouth, studying Ethan, who was laughing with a volunteer about whose playlist had the worst taste. There was a softness in that laugh that made my chest ache. After lunch, the sky shifted. The light got bright around the edges, a sign the afternoon would be shorter than we wanted. People worked faster. That's when it happened. The hammer. It should have been clipped to a belt or placed in the tool bucket. It was on the third rung of the ladder. My dad, moving to help when no one asked him to, bumped the ladder with his hip. The hammer slid, teetered, fell. He reached for it, barehanded. Ethan caught it just before the claw met my dad's fingers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He just held the hammer and looked at the tape line beside my dad's boot, the one labeled, "No step past this line. Active fall zone. Step back, please," he said. Silence pressed against my ears. My dad stepped back. The radio kept singing about a truck and a heartbreak. Oblivious. I waited for the explosion, the big fight, the crosswords that never get put back. Instead, Ethan turned the moment into something else. "Crew," he called. Tool talk. 2 minutes, everyone looked up. He held the hammer in his palm like an artifact. "This is a hammer," he said dryly. A few people laughed. He smiled just a little. "It's also proof that we're human. Humans get tired and distracted. That's why we put tools in buckets, not on ladders. That's why we stay behind tape lines. That's why we take care of each other even when we're sure we don't need it." His eyes flicked to my dad, then back to the group. "We don't test gravity. Gravity always wins." The tension broke. People nodded. Work resumed. But something else had shifted too, like a door closing softly in a room you didn't realize was drafty. My dad said nothing for the rest of the afternoon. He stood behind the tape, vest bright, glasses fogging, jaw tight. On the drive home, my dad rode with us. He didn't ask to. He just opened the back door and got in. Our car was an extension of his will. The first 10 minutes were just the sound of tires and the world clicking past. Then he cleared his throat. "You embarrassed me today," he said to Ethan. I felt my stomach drop. I opened my mouth to defend him, but Ethan held up a finger, politely asking for a second. "I didn't mean to," Ethan said. "I meant to keep everyone safe." "My house," Dad said. "My rules." "Not today," Ethan said, gentler than I expected. "On that site, I have a responsibility. If you were at your old garage, I'd listen to you." "Different places, different rules," my dad scoffed. "Rules. Respect," Ethan said. The word hung there. It felt heavier than the hammer. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, I turned off the engine and turned around in my seat. "Dad," I said, voice shaking with everything I'd swallowed for months. "Why do you keep testing him? He's not a tire to kick." He looked at me, eyes darting the way they do when he wants to be angry, but a different feeling is clawing its way up. "You don't know the things I've seen," he said finally, low. "Men who smile and fold. Men who promise and leave. I thought if I pushed, I'd see the real shape of him before it mattered." "It matters already," I said softly. "It always mattered." He stared at his hands. For once, he had no test ready, no quip. He got out of the car and went inside. That night, I lay awake listening to the rain start again, softer this time. Ethan traced circles on my back, an orbit of comfort. "I think your dad is a good man," he said. "I think he's afraid." "Of what?" I whispered into the dark. "Of loving something he can't control." I thought about the hammer, the tape line, the way my dad had stepped back when asked. It was small. It was also everything. A week later, the real test began. It was Sunday. My mom invited us for lunch. The house smelled like cumin and tomatoes. The soccer game murmured on TV. My dad sat at the table with a deck of cards, tapping them against the wood like a heartbeat. "Game?" he asked Ethan. Ethan took a seat. "Sure, rummy, the game of my childhood. Math pretending to be luck." My dad always played it like chess, watching how you watch the cards. They played for 20 minutes. My dad kept looking up to see if Ethan would ask him for something, a tell, a weakness. Ethan didn't. He told a story about a volunteer who mixed up 2 boards labeled A and B and how they'd turned it into a teaching moment. "2 more," my dad said. "Dealing." Ethan placed his cards face down and looked at my dad. "I have a proposal," he said. My mom glanced at me, eyebrows up. Proposals at our table rarely ended well. "Let's trade tests," Ethan said. "Just for today. You set one for me. I set one for you. We both play by the other's rules. We both agree to learn something, not just win. Deal?" My dad leaned back. He was surprised. He was interested. The part of him that loved a challenge perked up like a bird hearing seeds hit the ground. "What's your test?" he asked. Ethan smiled. "I'll take yours first." My dad nodded slowly, thinking. He stood up and went to the garage, returning with a cranky old push mower. He set it in the yard where the grass was stubborn and long. "No motor," he said. "Sharpened last year. Let's see if you can cut clean rows without missing a strip." I stared at him. It was hot. It was unnecessary. It was so thoroughly my dad that I wanted to knock on his head like a door. Ethan didn't flinch. He wheeled the mower out. He pushed. The blades whispered, the grass fell, the lines were crisp. He paused only to wipe his forehead and sip water. 45 minutes later, the yard looked like a before and after photo. My dad grunted. "Fine," he said. "Your test?" Ethan looked toward the garage. "I want to show you something," he said. He led my dad to the workbench and to a small wooden box he'd built last week when we were there, just to visit. I hadn't noticed its purpose before. Inside were 2 measuring tapes, both new, both uncannily similar. "Pick one," Ethan said. My dad lifted the left tape and pulled it to the 10-inch mark. He did the same with the right. The numbers matched. He raised one eyebrow, suspicious. "Trick?" "No trick," Ethan said. "But come with me." We walked to the kitchen table. Ethan set a scrap of wood on the surface. "I want you to mark 6 pieces at exactly the same length," he said, handing my dad the tape. My dad measured from the edge, marked a line, measured again. He did it 6 times, sure as a heartbeat. Ethan handed me a pale pencil and a combination square. "Check," he said. I slid the square along, aligning with the marks. At the first board, the line fell square. At the second, it was a hair off. At the third, the pencil slipped. By the 6th, the marks had shifted almost 1/8 of an inch. My dad frowned. "I was careful." "I know," Ethan said, kind. "Now try it this way." He showed my dad a jig he'd made, just a simple spacer block clamped to the board. "Now mark against the jig, not the tape," my dad did. The lines came out identical. "What's the point?" he asked, guarded. Ethan's voice softened. "No matter how good your eye is, your hand shakes." My hand shakes. "Tape stretches, pencils dull, people get tired. That's why we use guides. Not because we don't trust our instincts, but because we respect the work and the people around it enough to put something steadier than pride between us and a mistake." He waited, letting the words settle. "That's what all the rules are," he added. "Guides, they don't insult your skill. They protect it." My dad looked at the lines. He looked at the yard through the window, perfect stripes glowing in the sun. He looked at Ethan, and his face did something I hadn't seen in months. It cracked, not with anger, but with something like relief. "And your test for me?" he asked, the edge in his voice dulling. Ethan held his gaze. "Admit you're wrong when you are," he said. Out loud. "Today, if the moment comes." My dad's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. This was not a test you could pass with muscle. It was a test that asked for a different kind of strength. He nodded. "Deal," he said, and this time it sounded like a word you could build a life on. It happened faster than I expected. We sat to eat. The table was a map of our family. Bowls of food at the borders of elbows and stories. My mom served, her hands moving like a practice song. My dad reached for the serving spoon at the same time I did, and the spoon clattered to the table, splattering a comet of sauce across the wood. "Careful," he snapped, the old bite back too quick to catch. He leaned forward, scowling at the mess, at me, at the ruined symmetry of the meal. Then he stopped. He looked at the sauce, at the spoon, at his own outstretched hand. He closed his eyes, inhaled. He exhaled. "That was my fault," he said, voice strange in its softness. I grabbed too fast. "I'm sorry, Lila," Time hiccuped. My mom's eyes filled. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I had to take a shaky one. Across the table, Ethan didn't smile. He didn't nod triumphantly. He just reached for a towel and dabbed at the sauce until the comet was a faint galaxy. We ate. The conversation loosened. My dad asked Ethan a question about the build. What was the slope on the ramp? 1 inch per foot, Ethan said, automatic. My dad nodded slowly. "Makes sense," he said, and if you knew him, you knew that 1,000 unsaid compliments were packed into those 2 words. When the plates were pushed back and the tea poured, my dad cleared his throat. He didn't look at anyone in particular. "I have been hard," he said. "Harder than necessary. I thought I was protecting my daughter. Maybe I was protecting myself." No one moved. Even the clock seemed to back away to give him space. "I had a father," he said quietly, like the sentence had been stored in a locked box for years. He was all storms and no rain. He would make you work for a pat on the back that never came. I learned to expect people to fail me, so at least I'd be ready. He looked at me, then at Ethan. "You didn't fail," he said to my husband, the words careful like stepping stones. "You were steady." "Even when I wasn't," he swallowed. "I am sorry." Ethan nodded once, not making the moment bigger than it needed to be, not making it smaller either. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd like us to trust each other. It'll make life easier." My dad huffed a laugh that sounded like the release of a valve. "I like easy," he said, and we all pretended that was true. He stood up, the chair legs scuffing the floor. He went to the garage and returned with the old toolbox he keeps like an heirloom, dents mapping decades. He opened it and took out a battered carpenter's pencil, the kind you can't put behind your ear without it falling off every 3 steps. He handed it to Ethan. "For the jig," he said. "For the hand that shakes." Ethan took it, warmth in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, as if he'd been handed more than a pencil. Maybe he had. I watched the exchange and felt something uncoil inside me, something that had been braced for an impact that didn't come. I hadn't realized how much space fear was renting in my chest until it moved out. After that day, my dad didn't become a different person overnight. He still had opinions about everything from tire pressure to the proper way to slice mango. He still teased Ethan about his tendency to label every container in the fridge. But the tests, the ones designed to make a man flinch, stopped. The next time we visited, he handed Ethan the grill tongs instead of asking him to grab patties with his bare hands. He didn't pretend it was a big deal. He didn't make a speech. He just accepted a hot tool and a cooler heart. At the build site, he started showing up on Saturdays, with safety glasses already on. He checked in like everyone else, signed his name like it was a promise instead of a mutiny. Sonia put him on stair handrails, and it turns out that patience, once he wasn't trying to win, is something my dad has in depth. He sanded the railing smooth, ran his palm along it like he was asking if it felt like safety. One morning, a new volunteer tried to step over the tape line, eager. My dad held up a hand. "Behind the line, please," he said, firm but kind. And I swear I saw him remember the hammer as he smiled and added, "Gravity never misses." On a quiet evening a few weeks later, I sat with my mom on the back steps, while the sky turned the kind of pink that makes you believe in good endings. She sipped her tea and bumped her shoulder against mine. "He listens to you," she said, meaning my dad. "He always has. But sometimes he needed a different voice to show him why listening is not the same as agreeing." "Ethan's voice," I said. "And yours," she said. "You asked him to stop testing and start trusting. That is the work." Inside, Ethan and my dad were arguing good-naturedly about the soccer game. It was loud the way happiness is loud, unself-conscious. The house felt bigger with the noise, like it could fit more of us. Later that night, as Ethan and I did dishes, I asked, "Were you scared?" Testing him back like that? He rinsed a plate thoughtful. "A little," he said. But I wasn't trying to trick him. I wanted to offer him what he'd never been offered. A test you can pass by being human. He dried his hands, turned to me, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "Plus, I knew you'd have my back if it blew up," he added, a grin playing at the corner of his mouth. "I always will," I said. And it felt as simple and as complex as any vow worth making. We still have that pencil in our junk drawer. Every time I see it, flat-sided, blunt, stubborn, I think about the day my dad stepped back behind a yellow line and discovered that respect can be a boundary you draw to keep love from spilling out. I also think about the yard. How the lines looked like a flag of our tiny country. This family, defended not by strength, but by humility. It's a banner we fly silently, in small choices. We apologize when we should. We read the manual. We trust the person holding the hammer not to let it fall. I used to imagine love as a grand thing. Roses on a doorstep, dramatic declarations in the rain. It is grand sometimes, but mostly it's the sort of quiet that makes a room safe. It's a hand over yours when you reach for a falling thing. It's a man who will mow the lawn with a push mower because your father asked, and a father who will say, "I was wrong," because your husband showed him how. I don't know if my dad knows that Ethan tested him that day. Maybe test isn't even the right word. Maybe it was an invitation to build something together that would hold. A ramp, a habit, a new way to walk into a room. When I tell my students to draw a straight line, they reach for a ruler. At first, they think it's about perfection. Later, they learn it's about respect. You use a guide because the line deserves it. So do people. If the story had ended differently, if my dad had doubled down, if Ethan had snapped, I don't know what I would have done. But it didn't end that way. It ended with a pencil, a jig, and a man choosing to be led in a place where he used to only lead. It ended with a promise small enough to fit in a pocket. I will be careful with what matters. On the anniversary of that build day, we went back to the duplex. A new family lived there. Wheelchair tracks smoothing the ramp, wind chimes counting the breeze. The porch smelled like thyme and old wood. The handrail was still satin smooth. My dad ran his palm along it and smiled without saying anything that would ruin the quiet. Ethan stood beside him, hands in his pockets, eyes soft. I slipped my hand into his. The chimes sang. Somewhere a hammer bounced inside a toolbox. Harmless. I like this, my dad said finally. What part? I asked. All of it, he said. The plan, the tape, the people, the way it felt when we made something and nobody got hurt. He didn't look at me when he said it, but he didn't have to. The words were all the apology and all the blessing we needed. On the walk back to the car, Ethan squeezed my hand once, quick. It said, "We did okay." I squeezed back. I thought about the girl I'd been at the start of this, laughing too brightly, choosing peace at the cost of honesty. I thought about the woman I was now, who had learned that love is not a test to be passed, but a craft to be practiced. You measure, you mark, you build with guides. You admit when your hand shakes and you ask for help. I remember the night everything changed. The hammer, the tape, the way my dad stepped back. Sometimes the first act of respect is simply stepping back far enough to see the person in front of you clearly. So, what would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.